built by the adherents to a religion, or spaces or places where important dates occurred and how those places um, matter to a particular culture. And then the other thing that actually impacts the cultural landscape, and until teaching this course and thinking about religion, I never really thought about it, is the idea of how pilgrimage, how going from your home to wherever this your pilgrimage takes you, depending on your faith, how all that also affects cultural landscape. So we'll look at these things and then we'll wrap it up and we'll see what else we can learn today. All right, here we go. So, as far as sacred sites in Jerusalem, and again, why Jerusalem was decided not to be the capital until current administration, and why not to recognize it as the capital of Israel, and why Tel Aviv is the capital of Israel, politically speaking, is because of the importance of one place in the religious and the cultural landscape of these different groups. The Western Wall is one of the holiest places in all of Judaism. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Christianity, which is, and then Islam's Dome of the Rock, which is where it is believed Muhammad ascended to heaven. All of these sacred sites, all of these places that are of the utmost importance to these faiths, are in one place. So how can you make it the Jewish capital, I guess, was the argument, when it's important to so many people. And there's also a fourth quarter. Israel is divided. Jerusalem is divided into quarters, and there's a fourth quarter there, and that's I believe it's the Armenian quarter. I believe. Now, Hinduism also has sacred sites and sacred places with lots of importance. The Varanasi in India on the Ganges. The Ganges River is the holiest of rivers. You go there to bathe and be blessed. It's also believed that if you are uh, cremated or burned upon death at a certain site on the Ganges, that you can skip the whole cycle of reincarnation and achieve moksha. So the Ganges, again, being a physical, right, or a natural uh, sacred site, has other things that ascribed to it, as I said, like with the washing and the death and things. So things are going to be built along that river, that are going to impact the culture and the religion of a particular group. All right, next. Sacred landscapes in Buddhism as well. This is the Switagon, apologize for pronunciation, pagoda. This is in Myanmar. Um, it's believed that 8 hairs of the Buddha, of Siddhartha, are preserved under this dome. Again, making it a very important place in Buddhist culture. And then churches and cathedrals in the Christian world. Catholic churches, um, this is more than a church, this is definitely a cathedral. The church in the Catholic world and in the Protestant world, you think about those pictures of little small towns in New England or small rural places in the center of town, typically at the highest possible elevation. Again, talking about site factors mattering as far as culture is concerned. Churches were tended to be in the center of town. Cathedrals were built to reach to heaven, and they were built to show the grandeur of God in people's lives, and they were built over so many periods, some over a century. So fathers and sons and grandsons, all these people would be responsible for the building of these cathedrals. So they were fully integrated into the city. And again, you wanted them to be visible from as far as possible. So they were always tall and always high. And anybody know what style of architecture that is? Just wondering. Um, Protestant church. This again looks like a cross. This remember, Protestants were Catholics, so the importance of church isn't going to be lost on them. The interesting thing about this one is this is a Church of England, so this is an Anglican church, which is, like I was born and baptized Episcopalian, which people always call Catholic light. Um, Anglican Church is also the Catholic light. The I think kind of cool thing about this with respect to um, how cultures can coexist is that there are Buddhists, Hindus, and Muslims in Singapore as well, and then there's this one church. So that's kind of cool. And here we're talking about, again, this shows you what the dominant denomination is in the United States. That does not mean that there aren't others there. It just means that this is um, the majority religious faith. And when you start thinking about this, when you start looking at what type of religions exist as the dominant religion in certain areas, then you start thinking about what that means as far as the culture of this region, because that religion is going to matter. That religion and the beliefs of that religion and the moral undertones of that faith are what's going to matter. Um, so again, the Catholics up north, and you have to think about why it's Catholics up north, the Baptists in the south, and what that means. Florida in the peninsula is mixed. Well, why is it mixed? What does mixed mean? Over in on the western half of the United States, it's also our western half, the west coast of the United States. It is also mixed. So, um, who are these settlers? Why are there Catholics in New England and then these little tiny French Catholics in Louisiana? Where'd they come from? But who are these groups? Okay, when you look at the fact that the Upper Midwest is the majority faith is religion. Okay, so if excuse me, is Lutheran. Well, where did the Lutheran Church begin? And if you can think back to history classes, you know who's responsible for the Lutheran Church in the name. Um, where are those people from? So you kind of get a feel for where people settled, and based upon the cultures they brought, these parts of America are going to develop along those lines. Let me get my stylus. I knew something was missing. Hold on. All right. So you know that up here, let's go back. With the high Lutheran population, you're going to have people of Northern European, of German, Prussian descent. Because remember, when we're a colony and when we're heading west, Germany's not a country yet, so you can't say they were Germans. They could be ethnic Germans, and we'll get into that Monday or whenever we meet again. All right, so when you're looking at religions, who are these people? Like, there's different Germans. These are Pennsylvania Germans. Interesting little note about the Pennsylvania Germans. They're called Pennsylvania Dutch, which doesn't make any sense because they're German. And they're called Pennsylvania Dutch, and I learned this a few years ago because you know how Americans don't pronounce everything. It was a mispronunciation of Deutsch. So it's Pennsylvania Deutsch. So there you go. I learned that after calling them Pennsylvania Dutch my whole life. So now I'm only slightly more woke. All right, moving on. Sacred landscapes in Islam, the mosque, the dome. This is the dome in Isfahan in Iran. Uh, again, in Muslim art and Muslim architecture and Muslim culture, geometry, geometric symbols, patterns. The whole concept of tessellation is is a Muslim thing. But the dome is a significant part of their temple, their mosques, and for a number of different reasons. One, it's aesthetically pleasing and beauty matters. What role does religion play in political conflict? So now this is a nice segue. We saw, and there's a nice little background given to you in the previous slides. Think about Jerusalem being divided into four quarters, and that three of the largest religions in the world all claim Jerusalem as a holy place. Think about how, again, through analysis of scale, taking the United States and how there are different religious groups within one country, well, that doesn't mean we're the only country like that. How do different religions and different uh, and how those religions either augment or build a culture? How do those cultures coexist or not? So, you know, why there's conflict in the world, religion plays a part in it. Resources play a part in it, but religion also plays a part in it. Okay, so there are two things that we're going to look at. We're going to look at interfaith boundaries, and these are boundaries between faiths, and then there's intra, intra-faith boundaries, and these are boundaries within a single faith. So, interfaith is the Christian Muslim world. Intra-faith is the Protestant Catholic world or the Sunni Shia world. Again, those are the two types of boundaries we're going to look at here. All right, all right. Now, this is Africa, and this is the interfaith boundary in Africa. The northern part of the African continent, predominantly Muslim. And then below this line right here, this is the interfaith boundary right here. Again, now doing a little review. What type of boundary is this? Is this what these two? Sorry, not boundary. This boundary creates two regions. Are they formal regions, or what type of regions are these? That's something to think about. And again, reviewing previous units. But why is this half or this portion of Africa? Why is the northern portion of Africa majority Muslim, and why not this part? And again, history matters and geography matters. This was easier to conquer in 600 through 1400 than this. Remember, the Europeans didn't come into Africa until the 1800s because, malaria. So geographically, this was easier. It's probably the biggest reason. And then you have to think about why you would go here in the first place. Resources, the ability to acquire resources, the fact that Egypt was known, that I'm sure the North African coast was known for trade and the like. So it just made it easier. And then down here, you also have to remember too, Africa, big continent, but that's an interfaith boundary. All right. In another one, and this is a much more dicey one, and in other classes I teach, in my international relations class, when students choose to do the Southwest Asian unit, Middle East unit, one of the assignments I always have students do is I give them various maps, and each map has a different data set on it. One of them is water, one is resources, one is arable land, and I have you repartition it. So, not to get into too much history here, but post World War One, and then there was a mandate that Britain promised Israel, promised the Jewish people Palestine. In 1948, the UN creates Israel. They go to war immediately. In 67, Israel controls the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. In 2005, they're supposed to withdraw from the West Bank. There's control of movement. There are a multitude of interfaith boundaries. Again, the green here are Palestinian areas. You got water, you've got security. Notice here and here, all these different places. There are security barriers there being slowly made and drawn. Again here, so you have Jews and Christians and Muslims, and you have two different cultural groups who also. By the way, all this is supposed to be Palestinian. Notice that you're getting Israeli encroachment along all these lines. So this is the problem. You have two groups claiming the same homeland, two groups claiming the same homeland, partly for religious reasons, and one group behaving one way and the other group retaliating and making the situation worse. But this is because of faith and because of who believes. They both believe that their God, the same one, said this was theirs. At least that's what the Jewish people say. The Palestinians argue, we've lived here, So it's a mess. And in the next unit, you'll understand what kind of border these are. This is what kind of boundaries these are when you actually make countries out of nothing. So that's just a little foreshadowing into the next unit. That's a lot to take in. If you have any questions, there is plenty of stuff that you can read either in my classroom or online or take a course if you go off to college next year, or if you take my international relations class, we can get into that and spend a whole lot more time figuring out why this occurred and how, if a peaceful resolution is possible. I digress. All right. Another area where you see interfaith is in the Horn of Africa. You move me. I hate that this does that. Let's go back. Oh no, we can't get to that yet. All right, hold on. All right, here we go. Um, so here you see Somalia. This is the Horn of Africa because of the horn, but this region is what we're going to talk about. Um, you have Muslim and Christians together. You also have indigenous religions in the southwestern corridor of Sudan. This is where you'll see the Darfurians here. That's the Darfur region. Um, Also note that this is definitely an old map because there's no South Sudan here. Um, but this is again showing you certain areas and why certain areas are in conflict. Why we hear about stuff on the news. Um, Trying to live amongst another faith, and in this case, multiple faiths, because you have because I don't know what these indigenous religions are. I don't know if they're animistic. I don't know if they're which would be my best guess. By the way, Coptic is Christianity, is another form of Christianity. They're also Copts. Let me spell it. So in Egypt as well, there's a Coptic population in Egypt as well. But again, this is just another area where you see religions trying to coexist. And again, when you take a step back and you prepare and as you move through this class, what does this tell you about these regions? So why would there be conflict? What are the reasons nations fight? What are the reasons that countries struggle? Why, with a supposedly faithful people, behave a certain way? So you have to think about geography and the things associated with geography that make conflict a possibility. And now, probably one of the biggest messes of all time, at least in the last half of the 20th century, definitely the last 40 years, is the former Yugoslavia. Um, if you were to trace this out nice and neat, all of this land was once the country of Yugoslavia, post World War One Yugoslavia, and it remained Yugoslavia until the death of Tito, who basically just held them all together through muscle uh, and the collapse of the Soviet Union. And what you have here at the bottom, you see the different ethnic groups, the different nations, the different groups who see themselves as a certain group. And you see a lot of Serbs in different parts, and you see a lot of Croats in relatively different parts. And then you see a lot of groups of people that are ethnically or nationally see themselves as a certain people. Macedonians, Kosovoans, Slovenes, Slovaks are right there. But like the Muslims are all throughout this region. Hungarians are here in a part of uh, a land that's not Hungary. And then you have areas where there's no clear majority. And at the end of the existence of Yugoslavia, a lot of these countries decided that they wanted to create a lot of these nations, a lot of these peoples, these ethnic groups. And this is a lovely segue for our next unit. Wanted to create their own state. They wanted their own autonomy. And what do you do if you're a Serbian and this is where you are? Yet within there are Muslims, within there are Albanians, within there are a bunch of other people, even Bulgarians. So how do you come to some sort of consensus as to what you're going to do? And what they did really is try and get rid of the Muslims. Anyway, this is also something else we can talk about next year. But it's also important to know, and this has railroads and roads and other things on there, like where are the resources? Like who stands to benefit from these things? And in these different ethnic groups, you're going to have different faiths. Okay, yes, obviously they put Muslim here, which I find interesting because none of these other things are religions, but they put Muslim. Um, so I guess they're not Serbian Muslims. I guess they're just Muslim Muslims. I find this interesting that this is. I mean, if you think about going back to that TED talk and go back to how language matters, when everybody else listed on this map is listed as an ethnicity, and then you have Muslim, it would be no different than if a map of Europe had Germany, Germans, or in French, and then you see Jews. It's the same thing. What is that saying? Where's the bias in this? How can you possibly consider them? Um, I don't know, how can they be given a fair shake? I guess is what I'm trying to say here. So again, when you look at maps and you see charts or you see pictures or you read text, look at the language they use. Look at the words that they've chosen. There are many instances in the textbook that are biased. If when we had we gone through, when we had gone through Unit 6 and 7, there are slides that I would present, and you will see it that there's a bias, and so language matters, and pictures matter, and this is just a very interesting way of looking at how whomever it was that created this slide wanted to get sort of convey information. Okay, so that's just something to think about, and that's a lot. And again, if you have any questions or comments, send them to me. That's why I'm here. That, and if you know anybody who can remotely cut my hair. All right. Now, so this is the former Yugoslavia, and now you see what happens. Slovenia, some of these places break off, become independent pretty um, pretty peaceably. Slovenia does its thing. Croatia, for the most part, does its thing. Macedonia does its thing. But notice that all this here, and here, and Albania too, but is that you have two different groups trying to coexist here. You have Serbs who are not Muslim, and then you have Muslim dominated areas. And I don't know why they don't put, I don't know, Catholic, Orthodox. I don't know why, again, they're not using the other religion, but they're not. But this is just showing you some of the areas of conflict, because religions tie to culture, and these people are culturally different, and they all feel that they have a right to this land, and this caused a decade of um, just bloodshed and legitimate genocide. Another place that we may hear of a lot in world history where religion and and this is definitely an intra faith. Yugoslavia was interfaith. This is intra. You have Catholic and Protestant, both Christian. This is intra faith. Um, Without getting too involved, Ireland is a Catholic country. England tried to basically, England tried to control it, ruled it for 200 years. One way to deal with the Catholics was to move Protestants in, and a lot of Protestants from Scotland, a lot of Presbyterians from Scotland, and a lot of English Anglicans were sent over. They got the good land, they got the jobs. This was the biggest issue here in Belfast, in Northern Ireland. There it is. There's the capital. They were kept from jobs. They were kept from land. They were segregated, walled in. Um, they were treated as subservients and Catholics down in the Republic of Ireland, in that part, because this Northern Ireland isn't born until I believe 1921, when Ireland gets its independence and England gets to keep this. And England got to keep this, and the Catholics weren't pleased, and the Protestants were. Um, so it just leads to bloodshed and bombing, and the IRA, which was born before this time, because the IRA is what helped get the Irish Free State actually home. But the Catholic majority, because most of the people is Catholic, even though here it says Protestant majority, more people here are Catholic than not. They were kept out of political positions, they were kept out of the best jobs, and this just led to serious problems until 98. Now, another thing that you get from these inter and interfaith boundaries are fundamentalists. Remember, a fundamentalist believes that their word is the truest word. It's a belief in the fundamental teachings of Scripture, that the Word is the actual Word, and that all those who disagree are wrong. It's faith. It is worldwide, which I think is an important thing to realize. There are fundamentalists in every country where there's religion. There are fundamentalists here in America. They're not all brown people. They're not all Muslims. Religious extremism is someone who believes what they believe to the point where they're willing to kill for what they believe. The idea of martyrdom, either themselves or others. Some of the impacts on these types of behaviors. One, they go in both directions. You have a reaction from fundamentalist or conservative peoples who want to retaliate, and then you have other responses where, okay, why don't we listen to why they're upset and try to accommodate. These words here, again, I can't say this enough. Words matter, and even these words, and I'm sorry, are biased, and it bugs me. And this is a conversation that I want to have while we have a minute. The word conservative. When we think about a conservative, um, we think about people who are going back in time and who don't want change and are afraid of the future and are old fashioned and fuddy duddies and whatever. And we think of liberals as the open minded, forward thinking, moving that way people, or that way, depending on where you're sitting. And I think it's important to understand um, that both conservatives and liberals want change to move a country forward. Okay, they do. Even when we're talking about religion and extremism and all that stuff, both groups are trying to move a country forward. One group, and we'll call them conservative, think that the ways we did things in the past will work. And we should use those, reintroduce those to move us forward. They're not trying to take us back to the 50s or back to the 1800s because you can't do that. It's analogous to the concept that there is no such thing as a stage one country, and if there was an apocalypse, there still wouldn't be a stage one country because everybody knows how to farm. So just because they want to use an idea that worked in the past, it's because they think it'll work to move people forward. You don't have to agree with it, but that's an important way of looking at conservatism. And then liberalism, the idea let's try something new, can be as equally detrimental to a country than trying to try something from the past, because when you're trying something new, you have no frame of reference. You don't know if it's going to work. It can sound like a great idea and then not work. So it's important to understand that when you hear people talking about conservative radio or conservative news or liberal news, that they both are trying to move forward. One group's looking to the future and one group's trying to get us there by using something that worked in the past. Also worth knowing that, and again, why language matters and why knowing words and knowing where words originate matters. A liberal in the 19th century, when you go look at European or British liberalism, they were small government, leave me alone, let me do my job. So even words change over time. And again, I'm sorry, I apologize for the digression, but this slide is an excellent example of how words can shape what we believe and how words tie into culture. And they further go into the TED Talk from last week. And it also, I think, clues you in as to perhaps like where this person, the originator of this presentation, is from, because these words may have a different connotation if they're from a different part of the world. Just stuff to think about. That's all. It's just stuff to think about. All right, now another issue. Whoops, that is a hotbed issue. Don't ask me what that is. I can't tell you. Gay marriage. Now, where gay marriage is allowed at the time of this PowerPoint was one state. It is more than one state today. I don't have my phone, so we can't ask our good friend, the Irish-speaking Siri, how many it is today. A couple other places allow domestic unions. Some places allow blah, blah, blah. So you see, okay? During the time of this PowerPoint, most of the country did not recognize or allow. There were there was either a law or a constitutional amendment barring homosexuals from getting married. Now, again, your beliefs are your beliefs. We're not here to discuss beliefs at the moment. We're here to discuss geographically why here, ironically, because go back to the map of the denominations in the United States. I find it interesting that this is the part of the country where you have, at worst, domestic union, and at best, allowing same-sex couples to be legally um, joined. And again, out here as well, not legal. They can't get married during this time period, but they can be a couple. And I find this side is less surprising to me if you go back to the religion map than this one. And then conversely, all these regions in America where it says no, what's the religion that lives there? How does that impact their culture? What do you know about Lutheranism, if anything? If there's any practicing Lutherans, or remember down here, going back to the very, very beginning of this course, when we talk about the South being a vernacular region, and one of the reasons it was a vernacular region, it was because of the various ways it was described. And one way of determining where the South began was the number of Baptists. So that's what the slide said. That's what some people have said. So if that's the case, what do you know about the Baptist faith and their interpretation of their word? So again, language, religion, it all goes into who we are. And is it a case where we begin to farm and we hang around each other and we begin to develop our own ideas, and then I'm assuming the language will come first, and then the faith comes as a byproduct of us hanging out and the words we use? Or does the belief in something controlling everything exist prior to governments and civilizations and cities being formed, and that drives how places and cultures develop? I don't know. It's just a question to think about. There's also fundamentalism in Judaism. There's Orthodox Judaism. There is an anti-Arab sect in Judaism. Now, I would imagine, and I don't know, I think it would be interesting to see, and if somebody out there wants to watch this and tell me when they began to preach their anti-Arabism, because I'll bet you it's not until after 1948. That's just a hunch. So that's just me based upon, as soon as Israel's created, as I said previously, wars declared, and they have fought numerous wars for their survival, really, during this time period. And you have heard, if you've watched the news or read anything at all, that there are pockets of the Arab world or the Muslim world that don't want Israel to exist. And part of the reason for their disdain for the United States is because we support, sanction Israel. Okay. Fundamentalism in Islam, Sharia law. Uh, Sharia law is fundamentalist. It's no different than someone saying that, as I understand it, that the Bible is the actual word of God. The Quran is what it is. Ayatollahs are religious leaders; they're not political leaders of countries. And in some places, Iran is one. The religious head, the Ayatollah, um, makes policy, and so Iran is a theocracy. Now, um, that said, the Muslim church is not hierarchical like the Catholic Church. So it's not as if you have a Ayatollah and then lesser Ayatollahs. They are local and they are regional. So that's a distinction that's very important, and that also um, is important in understanding that because it's local and because it's regional, it's not every Muslim. It's not a doctrine. Or Taliban's a religious group in Afghanistan. Now, a jihad, jihad is a word which has really been taken out of context by Muslims and by Americans. The jihad is a struggle. And it can be an internal struggle, as I understand it. And they have taken that, these groups have taken it to say our struggle is with this group, and they've globalized it. Again, talking about scales of analysis, okay? Wahhabism in Saudi Arabia, and then Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda. Wahhabism is fascinating, and in its ideas, and it's why Saudi Arabia is well in the news lately. Well, it's in the news for a couple of reasons: that and the potential purchase of a soccer team. But you know, very conservative and very fundamental, and yet over the past couple of years, like, women have finally been allowed to get their license, and yet at the same time, the woman who fought for women to get the right to drive was in prison. So Saudi Arabia is wrestling with some stuff because they're our ally, and their human rights record is questionable, and but a lot of it comes from this, um, and from the standpoint that they were lied to uh, by Britain and by the West in World War One. That's part of it as well, and that's it. That's religion. So we have looked at. Let's go back to that for a second. Okay, so we have looked at how religions are born, where they're born. We looked at the languages they've used, how they develop over time, how religions within a particular area, either inter or intra faith, can impact how those areas develop, what impact famous places, famous structures, famous events have in the cultural makeup and landscape of where people live, where you live, um, and how it all ties into culture. And then going back to my question, is it us coming together first, or do other things make us who we are? I tend to think that things develop once we come together, and then we begin to trade and we begin to experience different things, and life begins to happen to us, and that shapes what we believe, and that shapes what we know. But that is culture. That's who we are as individuals, who we are as peoples, and who we are as a collective. Um, with the differences in language, with the differences in religion, is you know is the conflict that we see every day inevitable? Is the language we have been taught going to make it difficult, if not impossible, to overcome how we use certain words? Is there a possibility that with globalization, one language or one way of thinking eventually dominates? I don't know. These are pretty cool questions. Um, we'll talk about them, but now we have our core. We have who we are. We have what we believe. We have how we communicate. We have food. We have a city. We have walls. We know who we are as a people. And now that we know who we are, we would like a border. We'd like to become a country. We'd like people to see who we are. We'd like to formalize our ethnic usness, and then carve out our own little place in the earth. And that's how we're going to finish this course this year. That's our next unit. We're going to look at ethnic background, and remember that Yugoslavia slide. And we're going to look at how ethnicities go about becoming, well, a nation, which is what they are, and how you go from being a nation, which is a group who believes what they believe collectively, and then how you become a state, or in American language, a country. All right. So we'll pick it up there next time. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Enjoy the rest of your day. I'll see you tomorrow. Peace.